This segment is brought to you by Asian Cultural Alliance,
ThesisGate may have fooled the masses, but it can't fool academics. Dr. Huan Si-lin, Dr. Xu Yongtai, and countless other scholars have launched investigations into Tsai's mysterious thesis. Dang Yong-sun is a PhD graduate from the University of California. He spent countless hours carefully poring over evidence from this case. Recently, Dang published a series on his personal Facebook titled Doctoral Thesis Tempest. The second article in this series is a deep analysis of the copy of Tsai's thesis at the National Central Library. Dang uses compelling logical arguments to unveil the government's corruption and collusion at the University of London. The final chapters of ThesisGate are at hand. We must examine these new revelations. In this episode, we will take a look at Dang's arguments, which Dang has so graciously provided to us free of charge. When we speak of a proper and passable thesis, we usually think of a printed thesis that adheres to a set of academically approved standards. Digital copies of a thesis are considered informal and therefore merely act as a supplement to a published thesis. Fundamentally, there is a difference between physical and digital editions of a thesis. The copy of Tsai's thesis, which sits in the London School of Economics and Political Sciences Women's Library, is a printed copy. The one in the National Central Library's possession is digital. The National Central Library has not printed a physical copy of the thesis. Why? Because National Central Library Director Zeng Su-xian still has reservations about the thesis. Director Zeng holds a PhD in library sciences. Even if the National Central Library accepted a fake thesis, Zeng respects her craft and her field enough to at least maintain some measure of academic integrity. That's why she only dares accept a digital copy of Tsai's thesis and refuses to print it out. A library in any other country will only recognize a thesis when it receives a bona fide physical copy. That is, unless we're talking about the Ethos or ProQuest databases, which can only take in digital files. A proper thesis will always have a proper copyright page. There is one primary difference between digital and printed editions of a thesis. Zeng's understanding of this minute detail is exactly what sets her apart from other people who are actively deceiving the country. Digital copies can be changed, altered, and removed at any time. Should an issue arise, whoever has access to the digital file can secretly modify the thesis to their liking. Printed theses, however, are not so easily manipulated. It's very difficult to change a printed thesis. Many professions have certifications. As long as people can pass tests, then they can obtain certifications in the field of their choosing. A certification for a thesis is its copyright page. Tsai can't produce a copyright page, therefore we must assume that her thesis is not legitimate. Anything Tsai says will only serve to stall and erode the public's trust in her. Let's go back to June 28, 2019. That's the date Tsai Ing-wen submitted her black leather-bound thesis to the University of London's Senate House Library. The Senate House Library rejected what Tsai had sent because there was no copyright page. The London School of Economics and Political Science instead placed the thesis in their women's library, specifically labeling it as Tsai's personal copy. Tsai's thesis was placed in the Women's Library Reading Room, which collects work from women's rights advocates from around the world. It is not kept in the same place as the theses her 105 other classmates wrote because those theses all have copyright pages. Tsai's does not. The thesis Tsai sent over requires special treatment. The thesis is a personal copy and can't even be placed with ordinary books. That's because Tsai's personal copy isn't a published work of literature. Can those who staunchly defend Tsai's PhD offer an explanation for this? Why is Tsai's thesis sitting in the Women's Library Reading Room and not placed with other proper theses? A proper thesis will have a proper serial number. At this point, it is clear why Director Tsai refuses to print the thesis given to the National Central Library. It's because the thesis does not have a copyright page, nor does it have a thesis serial number. Tsai accepted a digital copy as a compromise. National Zhengzi University, Soochow University, and the Ministry of Education claimed to have copies of Tsai's thesis. However, those copies have been made classified. But can't these institutions simply tell us what the serial number on Tsai's thesis is? Internal memos that circulate government agencies all have serial numbers. How is it possible that a thesis in their possession does not have a serial number? Is the serial number also a national secret? Who knew that the laws of the country were tailored to service a single person? If Tsai Ing-wen submitted a proper thesis as part of her PhD program, then it would be kept in at least 3 places: the University of London's Senate House and Institute of Advanced Legal Studies' libraries, and the London School of Economics and Political Science library. Tsai's thesis would also be entered digitally into the British Library's Ethos database, as well as the US-based ProQuest database. Though those digital outlets would not have printed copies of Tsai's thesis, they would at least have its serial number on hand. Furthermore, these 2 databases kept microform copies of copyright pages from theses in its collection back in the 1980s, during the period of time when Tsai graduated. Now, PDF copies of copyright pages are also available. For those of you not keeping track, Tsai's thesis, if it does exist in a proper format, would be located in 8 places if we include NCCU, Soochow University, and the Ministry of Education. The odds that all 8 copies were lost is mathematically minuscule. Authorization letter from the University of London. If, for whatever reason, a thesis does not have a copyright page or a serial number, then there is still one way to prove its authenticity. In Tsai's case, it would come in the form of an authorization letter from the University of London. The letter would certify and endorse the thesis as well as bear the school's seal. How difficult would it be to obtain a document with the school's seal? According to the school's policy, upon Tsai Ing-wen passing her viva, the Senate House Library would have received a copy of Tsai's thesis within 2 weeks from her external examiners. That copy would have been received with corrections from each examiner as well as suggestions for revision. Tsai would have had to obtain the revisions from the library and make the changes before she'd be given an authorization letter with the school's seal. If Tsai did not receive revisions from the library, then she couldn't have completed a final version. Authentication from Taiwan's representative office in the UK. Tsai would have had to have gotten her doctorate authenticated by Taiwan's representative office in the UK upon moving back to Taiwan. In order to do that, Tsai would have needed to submit an authentication letter from the University of London to the representative office. So, if Tsai never received an authentication letter, then we can safely assume that she did not receive a legitimate verification from the representative office. However, forgery is not out of the realm of possibility. It's happened before. In 1984, Taiwan's representative office in the UK was called the Free Chinese Center. When Tsai Ing-wen submitted a replacement diploma to Taiwan's representative office in the UK in 2010, the office should have reached out to the University of London to authenticate the degree. However, the representative office did no such thing. We know that because there would have been a document with the University of London's seal, but there wasn't. Despite this, the representative office proceeded to authenticate the document anyway. Unsurprisingly, Catherine Chang, head of the UK representative office at the time, has enjoyed many promotions after Tsai was elected president in 2016. Included components that shouldn't be there. A Chinese statement signed by Tsai Ing-wen. A Chinese written statement that Tsai signed authorizes the Central Library to create a digital version of Tsai's thesis. This statement is part of the thesis. The inclusion of this statement must be a joke played on the London School of Economics and Political Science. Does the statement mean that this thesis was meant to be read by people who could understand Chinese? Furthermore, the statement itself exposes a massive lie. The statement mentions a memo from February 8, 1984 that was used to notify Tsai that she passed her viva and that her thesis had been approved. The statement also mentions a notice of course completion dated January 23, 1984. It doesn't make sense that Tsai would receive word that she completed her course before she got word of passing her viva. This has become a running joke in the ThesisGate community. Shamelessly, Tsai has simply switched the two dates of the notices. As mentioned before, telling lies is an art form. A person who tells lies must be sharp, organized, and have a good memory to keep their story straight. Tsai's lies have become more extraordinary over time to the point that they're becoming larger than life. It's clear that she's not working hard enough to maintain her illusion. Thesis and Viva Passage Notification Memo. Though this document is important, it shouldn't be included with a proper thesis. Aside from problematic dates, there are other parts of this memo that raise suspicion. The UK usually formats dates without commas. Here, the memo's date is written with a comma, 8 February, 1984. However, dates in the UK usually do not include commas. An all-important missing line. Official memos from the University of London notifying students that they passed their Viva and that their thesis is approved would include the exact line, "A copy of the examiner's report on your candidature is enclosed with this letter for your information." However, we do not find that line anywhere in the copy Tsai provides. The words "dear" and "madam" are misaligned on the memo, indicating that the document had been altered. The letter's closing, "yours faithfully," has a comma after it. Commas are usually included after letter closings in American English, but not British English. The memo Tsai provides does not have the academic registrar G.F. Roberts' signature. The address line is formatted according to American English standards and not British English. British English address formatting would include commas at the end of each line. The last line of the address should be ROC and not Taiwan. In 1984, the country was still under martial law. The correct name for the country on a mailing address would be Republic of China, or ROC. It would not have been Taiwan. The memo does not adhere completely to either MLA or APA standards. The field of study is written according to MLA format, while the title of the thesis abides by APA standards. Under the MLA standards, Tsai's thesis title would simply be titled Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguard Actions, and not Title of Thesis, Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguard Actions. The Viva date on the memo exposes another lie. According to Presidential Office spokesperson Alex Huang, Tsai's Viva was administered on October 16, 1983, which is a Sunday. There is no way a Viva would have taken place on a Sunday. The notice of course completion. Similarly, a proper thesis would not include a notice of course completion. Aside from that, the notice itself presents many problems. The notice of course completion is not a notice at all. It's actually a conferment letter. Is this a mistake, or is it an act of incompetence? Tsai obviously does not know the difference between the two. A notice of course completion would be sent to the graduating candidate and should address the recipient as such. A proper salutation would be "Dear Sir/Madam," or even better, "Dear Ing-wen Tsai." The salutation to whom it may concern would only be used in a conferment letter when addressing potential employers of the candidate receiving the degree. Usually, employers who are looking to confirm a person's degree would be addressed with "to whom it may concern" in such a letter. A notice of course completion and a conferment letter have different purposes. A graduating student would receive a notice of course completion. They wouldn't necessarily receive a conferment letter. The date on a conferment letter should come later than that of a notice of course completion. Furthermore, it wouldn't come earlier than a memo notifying someone that they passed their viva. Tsai's mix-up of these dates in her own files point to forgery. Tsai can't produce a notice of course completion. She can only produce a photocopy of a conferment letter that doesn't have any signatures. The photocopy itself is dubious and untrustworthy. If Tsai intends on forging more English language documents in the future, then she should employ someone with a background in English writing. Otherwise, mix-up like the ones discussed before will unravel her lie. There is a problem with Tsai's date of conferment. Tsai's conferment letter is dated January 23, 1984. However, a letter sent by one Mrs. P.C. Kennedy on behalf of the Senate House Library to Taiwan's UK Representative Office dated September 30th, 1987, says that Tsai's date of conferment was March 14th, 1984. In that case, how could a conferment letter be sent out on January 23rd, 1984? A conferment letter comes after a notice of course completion and usually acts as a supplement to a degree holder's employment application. So, which date on which document is erroneous? Or are both dates completely bogus and made up? The conferment letter lacks a signature from Dr. I.L. Stevenson, who is the school official printed on the document. The initials of the person who typed the letter should have been lowercase rather than capitalized. If those forging the thesis had someone who had a thorough background in English on their team, they could have avoided this mistake. Overreaching. National Central Library puts their watermark where it doesn't belong. There's a rule at Taiwan's universities that says digital versions of a thesis must be watermarked. Therefore, the National Central Library went ahead and watermarked their version of Tsai's thesis. However, Director Tsai must not have realized that only the author's school can watermark a thesis. Furthermore, Tsai's thesis would have had to have been watermarked with the University of London's school seal to be deemed proper. By watermarking Tsai's thesis with its own seal, the National Central Library has overreached. The watermark acts as nothing more than a self-serving approval of this fake thesis. Director Tsai is risking a lot with this watermark. On one hand, she protects Tsai. On the other hand, she does so unlawfully. No one else can write another person's thesis for them. Tsai's thesis not only wasn't typed by her, the person who did was thanked in the acknowledgements page. How laughable. No page numbers. All of the documents mentioned above do not have any page numbers, which goes against thesis writing standards. According to those standards, everything except the cover page, and the copyright page need to be numbered. Included components that are optional for a proper thesis. Taiwan's thesis writing rules differ from those in other countries. Examiners' signatures on thesis cover pages are optional. External examiners do not need to sign the cover page. Unlike schools in Taiwan, Western universities typically do not have a rule saying that examiners must sign the cover page, so results may differ depending on where a thesis originates from. External examiner reports do not need to be included with a thesis. People familiar with the academic circle will know that the only way a PhD student can pass their viva is if an external examiner signs a report saying so. In the American education system, a student who passes their oral examination will receive a report signed by their examiners from the school. The report does not necessarily have to be included in a student's thesis. However, the PhD candidate should file away said report carefully in case they need it. Typically, schools will also keep a digital version of the report in their files. Schools in the UK are different. According to Article 38 of the London School of Economics and Political Sciences Guidelines for the Conduct of MPhil and PhD Oral Examinations, a copy of the cover sheet and the examiner's preliminary and joint reports are routinely sent to the candidates when they are officially informed by letter from the academic registrar of their result. This portion of the notice notifying Tsai that she passed her viva has been whited out. Typically, a letter or memo wouldn't allow for such large blank spaces. Printing the name of a doctoral advisor on the thesis's cover is also optional. This is something that also differs between schools in Taiwan and in the West. Western schools typically do not have rules on the matter because an advisor is usually mentioned in the acknowledgements page. They do not need to be labeled anywhere else. Issues that never would have arisen under the guidance of a doctoral advisor. At every juncture, Tsai insists that her doctoral advisor was Michael Elliott, a man who only held a bachelor's degree. Regardless of whether she was talking about her MPhil or her PhD, Tsai maintains that Elliott was her advisor. However, this raises a lot of issues, to the point that we must ask, did Tsai's advisor truly exist? Tsai's supposed doctoral advisor holds a bachelor's degree. He has a specialized interest in constitutional law. How was he qualified enough to help Tsai write a thesis on unfair trade practices? Moreover, Michael Elliott left the London School of Economics and Political Science in 1983 to advise Margaret Thatcher. How is it possible that he could assist Tsai during her viva, which supposedly took place in October of 1983? Dong pointed out that lying is an art form that requires consistency, logic, and linearity. Lies will unravel much too easily if they are not well thought out. ThesisGate is in its final chapters. The gears of Taiwan's judicial system have begun to turn. All of the cases related to ThesisGate have been consolidated. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK has chosen to stay quiet and uphold this charade to the very end. However, the truth is inevitable. History will be made.